are calling this heartbreak a loss. But some endings are not punishments. They are rescues. The bond broke because the signal changed, and what used to keep you attached could no longer keep you asleep. By the end of this message, you will understand why that sudden departure shook you so deeply, why toxic bonds can feel holy when they are not, and how to begin taking your energy back. If this message confirms your next step, type 111 below, like this video, and subscribe to this channel. There is a specific kind of pain that follows betrayal, and it does not arrive like ordinary disappointment. It hits the body first. Your chest feels strange. Your thoughts keep circling. Your appetite changes. Sleep becomes shallow. Even silence in your own home can feel louder than usual. You reach for your phone without thinking. You replay words, facial expressions, timing, little moments you once ignored. It is not just that someone left, lied, switched, or withdrew. It is that your inner world suddenly realizes it has been standing on unstable ground. That is why sudden departure feels so violent, even when no one raised their voice. A major betrayal does not only remove a person, it removes an assumed future. It tears up a script you had already begun living inside your mind. Maybe you pictured healing with them, growing with them, building something steady. Maybe you thought the confusion was temporary and the connection underneath it was still real. Then the truth shows up, and in one moment, your nervous system has to process two losses at the same time. The person is gone and the version of reality you were holding is gone with them. That is why people often say, "I don't even know what hurts more." It is not always the departure itself. Sometimes it is the humiliation of realizing how much you were carrying in your heart that the other person was never carrying with you. And that can make you question your own discernment. You start asking, how did I not see it? Why did I give so much? Why did I explain myself that many times? Why did I keep believing their words over my own discomfort? But those questions usually come too early. When the wound is fresh, the first thing you feel is shock. Not wisdom, not perspective, shock. You can know in your spirit that something was off and still grieve when it ends. You can have red flags in your memory and still miss the routine. You can know that peace was leaving your body around them and still ache when they are gone. That does not make you foolish. It makes you human. It means your heart was trying to preserve connection while your spirit was trying to preserve truth. Those two things can wrestle inside a person for a long time, and that inner wrestling is exhausting. Sometimes the betrayal is obvious, a lie exposed, a secret uncovered, a promise broken in plain sight. But sometimes it arrives through a cold shift. They become distant, strange, evasive, harder to reach, less tender, more irritable, more vague. They stop showing up with the same consistency but still want the same access. They want your understanding, your softness, your patience, your emotional labor. They just do not want the accountability that real love requires. So you feel the departure before they ever officially leave. You feel it in the delayed replies, in the missing warmth, in the way conversations suddenly become more draining than nourishing, in the subtle sense that you are now interacting with someone who is managing you rather than meeting you. And because the human heart wants coherence, you start working overtime to make sense of what no longer feels clean. This is where many people get trapped, not because they cannot see anything, but because they can feel too much and explain too much at the same time. You notice the tension, but then you soften it. You catch the inconsistency, but then you rationalize it. You feel the ache in your body, but then you call yourself dramatic. You know something is changing, but you keep waiting for one conversation, one apology, one breakthrough moment to restore what is slipping away. That waiting season can become its own form of bondage. Because now your energy is not flowing into your life. It is circling around a person who keeps disrupting your inner steadiness. The mind becomes a courtroom. The heart becomes a negotiation table. Your peace becomes collateral. And the saddest part is this. While you are trying to save the bond may already be consuming the very self you need in order to live freely. That is why some betrayals feel like a collapse from the inside out. You are not just grieving them. You are grieving how far from yourself you drifted while trying to keep the connection alive. And that realization hurts in a deeper way. Maybe you became more anxious than usual. Maybe you checked your tone constantly so they would not pull away. Maybe you over-explained harmless things because you could feel them becoming suspicious, moody, or hard to read. Maybe you learned to enter conversations already bracing for a strange energy you could never quite name. Maybe your joy started shrinking. Your clarity got foggy. Your confidence became dependent on whether the interaction that day felt warm or cold. That is not a small thing. That is what repeated emotional instability does. It trains your system to stay on alert. So when the break finally comes, it feels like a cliff edge. Your body has been preparing for impact for months, but your heart still hoped it would not happen. Here is what many people do not realize at first. The reason the ending feels so unbearable is not always because the relationship was that deep. Sometimes it is because the attachment became that intense. And depth and intensity are not the same thing. Real depth has steadiness in it. Real depth has honesty in it. Real depth makes room for truth, repair, and mutual responsibility. Intensity can feel sacred because it is overwhelming. But overwhelming is not the same as safe. A bond can be emotionally consuming and still be spiritually misaligned. It can feel magnetic and still be corrosive. It can keep pulling you back and still keep draining the life out of you. That changes the whole meaning of what you are mourning. Because sometimes you are not mourning true union. You are mourning stimulation. You are mourning anticipation. You are mourning the cycle of rupture and relief that trained your body to confuse chaos with closeness. And once you see that clearly, another question rises up. Why do toxic bonds so often feel like true love in the beginning? Part of the answer is that toxic bonds rarely introduce themselves as danger. They introduce themselves as relief, excitement, recognition, chemistry, destiny, or understanding. They arrive with a strange speed. You feel seen quickly, chosen quickly, pulled in quickly. The conversations become personal fast. The emotional access opens early. There is a sense that this person gets you in a way others never have. That feeling is powerful, especially if you have been lonely, especially if you have been carrying unspoken grief, especially if you are a person with deep emotional or spiritual sensitivity. When someone seems to recognize your inner world without you having to translate every piece of it, it can feel like home. But resemblance to home is not the same as safety. Some people study your openness before they deepen your dependence. They learn what soothes you, what wounds you, what earns your trust, what makes you stay, not always in a cold, calculated way. Sometimes they are simply operating from their own dysfunction, their own emptiness, their own unhealed patterns. But the effect is still real. You begin giving them access to places they have not proven they can honor. And once that access is granted, the imitation of love can become very convincing. Toxic bonds often mimic true love through emotional intensity, selective tenderness, and intermittent validation. In plain words, they give just enough to keep the hope alive, then pull back enough to make you chase the return of what felt good. One beautiful conversation can erase a week of confusion in your mind. One affectionate moment can make you question the seriousness of what has been draining you. One apology can restart a cycle that has already taught your body to abandon itself for crumbs. This is why people on the outside sometimes do not understand why it is so hard to leave. They think the answer should be simple. If it hurts, go. If they lied, leave. If they betray you, close the door. But the inside experience is more complex than that. Because toxic attachment often works by mixing pain and reward so closely that your nervous system starts treating relief as proof of love. You feel anxious, then soothed, ignored, then chosen, dismissed, then comforted, misread, then intensely pursued. Over time, the inconsistency itself becomes addictive, because you are no longer resting inside connection. You are recovering inside it, over and over again. That is not love. That is dependency dressed in emotional fireworks, and the spiritual danger of that kind of bond is serious. Not because every difficult relationship is cursed or every painful season is dark, but because anything that repeatedly pulls you out of inner stillness, weakens your discernment, and trains you to betray your own peace needs to be examined carefully. God-given awareness does not usually scream first. It nudges, it unsettles, it sends little moments of friction. a hesitation in your chest, a tightening in your stomach, a strange tiredness after certain conversations. A recurring sense that something about this dynamic is costing you more than it is giving you. Still, many people override those signals because the emotional high feels too meaningful to question. You tell yourself that intense must mean important. You tell yourself that your pain proves your depth. You tell yourself that because the connection shook you, it must have been rare. But sometimes what shook you was not rarity. It was instability. It was inconsistency. It was being opened, touched, and activated in places that had not yet learned the difference between hunger and alignment. That is a hard truth, but it is also a freeing one. Because now you no longer have to worship every bond that moved you. You can ask better questions. Did this connection strengthen my peace or slowly replace it with confusion? Did I feel safe to be honest, or did I feel pressure to manage the atmosphere? Was I loved, or was I kept emotionally busy? Did my life expand, or did my world start shrinking around their moods, silence, and unpredictability? Those questions matter. Think about how many people have mistaken constant emotional labor for devotion. They call it loyalty when they are actually carrying the relationship on their back. They call it patience when they are tolerating repeated disrespect. They call it fighting for love when they are really fighting to keep from facing the emptiness that would come if they finally accepted the truth. That is why betrayal can feel like withdrawal, not only from the person, but from the false hope that kept your pain organized. And yet even here, something sacred can begin. Because once the illusion breaks, clarity has a place to enter. Painful, yes, but honest. Clean. No longer decorated, no longer defended by fantasy. You start seeing the pattern that was hidden under the chemistry. You start noticing how often your spirit tried to warn you through discomfort. You begin to understand that what felt like deep connection may have been deep entanglement. There is a difference. Connection nourishes identity. Entanglement consumes it. Connection allows truth. Entanglement survives on confusion. Connection lets peace breathe. Entanglement makes peace feel distant, fragile, conditional. And maybe that is the grief no one talks about enough. The grief of realizing you were not just attached to a person, you were attached to a version of yourself that kept hoping love would arrive. If you just endured enough distortion, if you just explained better, if you stayed softer, if you were more understanding, if you could prove the purity of your heart, maybe the relationship would become what you sensed it could be. But potential is one of the most dangerous things to build a life on, especially when the present reality keeps bleeding you. So yes, mourn. Mourn honestly. Mourn the time, the trust, the tenderness, the dreams, the investment. Grief is not weakness. Tears are not failure. Missing them does not mean you should go back. It only means the rupture was real in your body. It means your heart needs time to separate love from longing, memory from truth, intensity from safety. That separation is holy work, because rebuilding after betrayal is not just about moving on. It is about learning what should never have had that much access to you in the first place. It is about noticing where your empathy became self-abandonment, where your hope became denial, where your spiritual sensitivity kept trying to protect a bond your body was already paying for. And once that comes into focus, you begin to understand something deeper. Not every ending happened because you failed to hold things together. Some endings arrived because what was hidden could no longer stay hidden. Some departures happened because the illusion had reached its limit, but that was only the first layer of what was really happening. Because when a bond breaks at the exact moment you can no longer keep pretending, the question is no longer just why they left, lied, or betrayed you. The deeper question is why life itself seemed to force the truth into the open. There are seasons when you think you are making a choice, but in truth, life is closing in around a truth you have delayed. You call it bad timing, you call it chaos, you call it loss. But sometimes what feels like everything falling apart is actually pressure being removed from your spirit by force, because you were never going to walk away while the illusion still had a pulse. That is what makes major betrayal so disorienting. It often does what your own will could not do cleanly. You may have known something was wrong for a long time, not in a dramatic way, in a quieter way. The kind of knowing that shows up when your peace keeps thinning out, but you still keep trying. The kind that appears after another draining conversation, Another strange inconsistency. Another moment where you feel yourself shrinking just to keep things smooth. You sense the misalignment, but you stay. You stay because of history, because of compassion, because of what you already invested. Because walking away from someone you loved feels harsher than slowly dying inside the connection. So life forces the issue. The hidden thing gets exposed. The lie surfaces. The betrayal becomes undeniable. The mask slips too far to ignore. And now the version of reality you were using to remain attached can no longer hold. The door you kept trying to prop open with hope gets shut by truth. It hurts, but it also ends the negotiation. That matters more than people realize. Because as long as ambiguity remains, many tender-hearted people will keep sacrificing themselves to possibility. They will keep reading potential like it is proof. They will keep turning crumbs into signals. They will keep accepting emotional confusion because clarity might require a goodbye they are not ready to make. But once betrayal crosses a line you cannot explain away, your spirit is given something your emotions were refusing to accept: final evidence. That is why these moments can feel brutal and merciful at the same time. Brutal because the wound is real, merciful because the fog breaks. And when the fog breaks, you can finally see how much effort it took to remain bound to what was already failing you. Maybe you had become the one always initiating repair. Maybe you were carrying the emotional weight of every conflict. Maybe you were the one smoothing things over after they created the tension. Maybe your kindness had become a bridge they kept walking across without ever asking how much it cost you to hold it up. None of that always looks dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it looks like loyalty, patience, maturity, being the bigger person. But there comes a point when being the bigger person becomes another phrase for absorbing what should have never been assigned to you. This is where the divine interruption often happens. Not always with thunder. Sometimes with exposure, sometimes with exhaustion, sometimes with a sudden inner refusal you cannot explain. Something in you stops being willing to translate pain into purpose for the other person. Your body gets tired of carrying what your mind kept spiritualizing. Your discernment starts speaking louder than your attachment. And the relationship that once had room to keep operating in gray areas suddenly collides with a wall. You did not plan the collision, but you needed the clarity. There are bonds people leave in stages, and there are bonds life seems to tear away in one sharp motion, because delay had become dangerous. Dangerous not in the sense of catastrophe, dangerous because another year of that confusion would have reshaped your identity around survival. Another year of proving, waiting, explaining, and recovering would have made dysfunction feel even more normal. Another year of calling it love might have trained you to distrust peace altogether. And that is the kind of rescue people rarely thank God for at first. At first they cry. At first they shake. At first they keep reaching for what wounded them because the nervous system does not immediately celebrate freedom when freedom arrives through rupture. It still remembers the pattern. It still expects the next message, the next apology, the next moment of relief. It still wants to go back and secure the bond even after the truth has been revealed. That is why endings like this require more than insight. They require detox. Because the part of you that knows the truth and the part of you that misses the bond do not heal at the same speed. One part says, I see it now. The other says, but I still feel attached. That does not mean the revelation was false. It means your body is catching up to what your spirit already knows. And this is where many people start blaming themselves again. They say, if I know this was unhealthy, why am I still hurting? If I see what they did, why do I still want resolution? If I understand that this had to end, why do I still wake up thinking about it? Because knowledge does not erase imprinting overnight. A person can understand the fire and still feel the burn. A person can leave the room and still smell the smoke. Healing is not fake just because longing still visits you. In fact, one of the clearest signs that life was forcing your hand is that the bond often ends right where your self-betrayal was becoming unsustainable, right where your body could not fake peace anymore, right where your spirit was getting too tired to keep calling imbalanced connection. It often breaks at the place where your inner truth and outer reality finally collide. That collision feels like disaster when it happens. Later, it starts to look like mercy. And that changes the entire meaning of the situation, because now, The story is not just, they betrayed me. The fuller story becomes, I was being removed from a pattern I could not have exited cleanly while I was still under its emotional spell. That is a painful sentence, but it can save years. It can save years of romanticizing what was harming you. Years of replaying the good moments as if they canceled the damage. Years of wondering whether you overreacted when your peace was already waving a warning flag every week. Years of holding a person in your heart long after they proved they did not know how to hold your soul with care. And here is the part many people resist because it sounds almost offensive when the wound is fresh. Some of the worst days of your life end up becoming turning points. You would not reverse even if you could. Not because the betrayal was good, not because the pain was small, but because what it interrupted would have cost you even more. What if the day they lied was the day you stopped losing your mind in slow motion? What if the day they left was the day your future stopped leaking energy? What if the exposure that humiliated you also liberated you? What if your worst day was not the day your life collapsed, but the day the trap failed? Sit with that, because most people only measure pain by how it felt in the moment. They do not yet know how to measure what pain prevented. They do not know how to see the years of confusion they no longer have to endure. They do not know how to calculate the emotional debt they were about to keep paying. They do not know how much of themselves was about to be shaped around proving worth to someone committed to inconsistency. So they mourn the ending without realizing they narrowly escaped the continuation. Think about it. If the betrayal had remained hidden, you might have stayed longer. If the mask had slipped more slowly, you might have kept accommodating. If they had given you just a little more tenderness, just enough warmth, just enough reassurance, you might have mistaken delay for progress and invested even deeper. The very thing that shattered you may have also interrupted a much greater erosion. And once that thought settles, another layer opens. You begin realizing what you avoided. You avoided building a life on emotional instability. You avoided becoming permanently hyper-vigilant in a relationship that should have been a place of rest. You avoided the long-term cost of being bonded to someone who only valued access, not stewardship. You avoided years of shaping your personality around their volatility. You avoided the quiet death that happens when a person stops trusting their own internal signals because they had been taught to override them for the sake of keeping peace. That is not small. That is not abstract. That is life-changing. Maybe you avoided becoming colder than you were meant to be. Maybe you avoided losing your joy completely. Maybe you avoided carrying that same distortion into every other part of your life. Some relationships do not only wound the heart, they start coloring everything. Work becomes heavier. Prayer becomes harder. Friendships get neglected. Creativity dries up. Your body stays tired. You lose interest in simple things that once restored you. You are physically present in your life, but inwardly you are tethered to a dynamic that keeps pulling your attention back into confusion. Then betrayal cuts the cord by force before you are ready. No wonder it feels like an amputation. But amputations save lives when infection is spreading. That is why, months later, some people look back and whisper the sentence they never could have said in the middle of the heartbreak. If that had not happened, I would still be there, still explaining, still waiting, still hoping, still bargaining with reality, still calling emotional depletion love. That is the hidden mercy, not that you got hurt. No, that would be a cruel reading. The mercy is that the injury exposed the poison, and once exposed, your eyes cannot fully go back to sleep. This is also where self-forgiveness has to enter, because when people realize what they avoided, they often swing into shame. They start condemning themselves for ever staying, ever trusting, ever ignoring the signs. They treat their younger self like an enemy, but that version of you was not stupid. That version of you was trying to preserve connection with the tools and awareness available at the time. That version of you believed effort could say what honesty would eventually expose. That version of you needed compassion, not mockery. Do not heal by becoming cruel to yourself. Heal by becoming honest and kind at the same time. Say it plainly. I stayed too long. Say it gently. I understand why I did. That combination is where maturity begins. Because rebuilding is not about pretending you were never affected. It is about refusing to let betrayal become the lens through which you see your own worth. Their inconsistency is not your value. Their deception is not a verdict on your discernment forever. Their inability to love cleanly does not mean you imagined your own goodness. It means your goodness was placed in the wrong hands. There is a difference, and once you stop making the betrayal mean you are broken beyond repair, space opens. Space to breathe without checking for their energy. Space to think one full thought without mentally rehearsing a conversation. Space to feel your own body again without the static of constant emotional anticipation. Space to hear the quieter truths that got drowned out while you were trying to survive the bond. That space can feel unfamiliar at first, even empty. But emptiness is not always loss. Sometimes it is clearance. Sometimes it is holy room. Sometimes it is the first evidence that your life is no longer being crowded by what was never supposed to remain. And this is where the real rebuilding begins. Not at the moment you stop missing them, but at the moment you stop calling the collapse a mistake. The moment you begin to see that a forced ending may have been protecting a future you were too bonded to the present to recognize. The moment you understand that not all rescue feels gentle. Some rescue tears. Some rescue exposes. Some rescue embarrasses the ego and saves the soul. That realization does not erase grief, but it gives grief direction. Now the pain is not just spinning in circles, it starts becoming wisdom. Now the questions shift. Not how do I get them back, but why did I need someone so unstable to choose me in the first place? Not how do I undo this ending, but what in me still feels tied to what has already ended. Not why did this happen to me, but what must be released from me so I never confuse intensity with alignment again. And once you reach that threshold, you are finally ready for something more than reflection. You are ready for separation, not just physical separation, energetic separation. Because none of this matters if they are still living in your body through memory loops, emotional triggers, imagined conversations, spiritual heaviness, and unreturned access. That is where the real work begins next. Because clarity is powerful, but clarity alone does not cut a cord. So now we come to the part people often avoid, even after truth becomes obvious. They understand the relationship ended. They accept that the betrayal was real. They can name the pattern. They can even explain the lesson, but inwardly the cord is still there. You can leave a person and still feel tied to them every morning. You can block the number and still be having conversations with them in your head. You can tell yourself it is over, yet still feel your body tense when something reminds you of them. Still feel your mood change when a memory rises. Still feel a quiet pull to check, revisit, reimagine, reinterpret, reopen. That is why rebuilding after betrayal is not only about insight, it is about release. Not dramatic release, not revenge, not pretending nothing mattered. Real release, the kind that withdraws access from what no longer has the right to occupy your energy. And this is where the cord-cutting guide becomes powerful. Not as superstition, not as a performance, but as a deliberate act of inner separation. A way of telling your mind, body, and spirit the same truth at the same time. This bond has ended. This access is over. I do not need to keep carrying what is already broken. Because the truth is, some relationships end on paper long before they end in the body. The body still remembers the anticipation, the emotional weather, the pattern of checking, waiting, decoding, bracing. Even when your logic is clear, your system may still be responding to an old connection, as if it is active. That is why release needs language, attention, and practice. You are not just deleting a contact, you are retraining your inner world to stop treating that person like a current authority. So here's a grounded way to begin. Find a quiet space. Sit down. Put both feet on the floor if that helps you feel present. Breathe slowly enough for your body to realize you are no longer in the emergency of the betrayal itself. You do not need a perfect atmosphere. You do not need candles or music or a dramatic ritual. What you need is honesty. Then name the person or the bond plainly in your own words. Do not name the fantasy. Name the reality. Not the version you hoped they would become. Not the future you tried to preserve. Name what this connection actually was in your life. Was it draining? Was it inconsistent? Was it deceptive? Was it emotionally controlling? Was it a place where you kept abandoning your own peace to maintain access to someone else's approval? Say the truth without decoration. That part matters because vague healing keeps vague attachments alive. You are not doing this to accuse them forever. You are doing it to stop lying to yourself in order to remain emotionally available to the wound. Then acknowledge the cost. This is where many people rush, but they should not. Say what the bond took from you. Your sleep, your concentration, your confidence, your ability to feel safe, your joy, your stillness in prayer, your trust in your own signals, your sense of self-command. Say it clearly, because the heart often releases more fully when it finally feels witnessed by its own mouth. You may be surprised what comes up in that moment. Sometimes the deepest grief is not, "they left me." Sometimes it is, "I left myself to keep loving them." And when that truth rises, do not run from it. Stay there, breathe there. Let it sober you without crushing you. Then speak the separation. It can be simple, it should be direct. You can say, "I release this person from my inner world. I call my energy back from every place I abandoned myself trying to hold this together. I release the need to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding me. I release the hope that clarity will come from the same place." Confusion kept repeating. I break agreement with the version of me that believed pain was the price of connection. Those words are not magic in the theatrical sense. Their power is in alignment. They help your body, your mind, and your spirit stop sending mixed messages. You are no longer saying, "I know it is over," while secretly waiting for another sign. You are no longer asking heaven to heal what you are still feeding with attention. You are choosing congruence, and that changes more than people realize. Because chords are reinforced through repeated emotional consent, through replay, through fantasy, through mental arguments, through checking for movement, through keeping a hidden altar to the connection inside your thoughts. Every time you rehearse the story in a way that keeps them central, the bond stays fed. Every time you imagine the perfect apology and emotionally live inside that scene, the cord tightens again. Every time you go looking for proof that they regret it, miss you, or finally understand your worth, you hand the connection fresh energy. That is why release also requires closure around behavior. After you speak the separation, decide what access truly ends now. Maybe you stop checking their page. Maybe you stop rereading old messages. Maybe you stop using lonely moments as an excuse to reopen memory loops that always leave you weaker. Maybe you stop discussing them with people who keep pulling you back into the emotional theater. Maybe you stop calling obsession processing. That last one matters. Processing brings you toward truth and peace. Obsession keeps you circling pain and calling it meaning. There is a difference. And once you begin noticing that difference, a second step becomes necessary. You have to replace the space the cord used to occupy. Because empty space without intention often becomes relapse. If your mornings used to begin with checking for them, begin them another way. Sit in silence for 5 minutes. Read something that steadies you. Journal one page of truth before your phone touches your hand. Ask yourself, what do I need today to feel returned to myself? If nights were the time you spiraled, create another pattern there too. Walk, pray, stretch, speak gratitude out loud, even if your emotions lag behind. Let your body learn new endings to the day. This is not small. Repetition is how the nervous system learns safety again. You are not just cutting a cord one dramatic time and never feeling anything again. You are cutting it, noticing when your habits try to retie it, and calmly cutting it again without shame. That is what real healing looks like. Not one perfect breakthrough, but repeated acts of self-return. And something beautiful starts happening when you practice that. The person loses energetic size. Their presence in your mind becomes less commanding. The memories may still exist, but they stop carrying the same electrical charge. The things that once would have pulled you into a 2-hour spiral begin to pass through with less force. You realize you can remember without re-entering. You can grieve without reopening. You can feel without surrendering ownership of yourself. That is freedom beginning. Here is another part of the cord-cutting process that many people skip. You have to forgive yourself for the bond, not excuse the harm, but forgive yourself for how deeply you got caught in it. Some people stay tied because self-condemnation is secretly another cord. As long as you keep punishing yourself for choosing them, for trusting them, for ignoring the signs, you remain tethered to the story. Shame keeps the wound alive by making the past feel like unfinished business. But when you say, "I did not know then what I know now," or "I knew in fragments, then I am listening fully now," something softens. When you say, "I released the version of me that thought surviving confusion was loyalty," a door opens. Now healing is no longer built on self-hatred. It is built on truth with mercy in it. That combination is strong, and once that strength begins settling into you, you start stepping into the cleared path. At first, it may not feel exciting. It may feel quiet, very quiet. No constant emotional static. No decoding. No sudden drops in energy because someone else shifted moods. No waiting for reassurance. No trying to measure the day by whether they came near, stayed warm, or acted distant. Just space. Honest space. That quiet can feel unfamiliar after betrayal because chaos trained you to associate intensity with aliveness. But peace has a different texture. It does not beg for attention. It does not perform. It does not flood your system and then disappear. It stays. It breathes. It gives your mind room to think and your spirit room to hear itself again. This is where many people discover how much life had been buried under the bond. Their laughter starts returning in ordinary moments. Their body softens. Their appetite stabilizes. Their creativity wakes back up. Their prayers get less desperate and more clear. They stop feeling watched in their own mind. They begin making decisions without mentally consulting the person who betrayed them. That is not just recovery, that is reclamation. And the cleared path is not only about feeling better, it is about becoming different, wiser, less available to confusion, less seduced by intensity, more responsive to peace, more respectful of your own internal warnings, more willing to leave early when your spirit begins paying for what your heart is trying to romanticize. You stop needing every ending to come with a neat conversation. You stop requiring your betrayer's understanding in order to trust your own. You stop calling access love. You stop mistaking chemistry for character. You stop proving your value to people who only notice it when it is being withdrawn. That is the deeper rebuild, because rebuilding yourself after betrayal is not merely learning how to survive what happened. It is learning how to live from a different center so it does not keep happening in the same form. It is recognizing that your sensitivity was never the weakness. Your lack of boundaries around where that sensitivity was poured is what hurt you. Your empathy was never the problem. Your willingness to extend it beyond the point of truth is what cost you. Your hope was never foolish by itself. It simply needed discernment standing beside it. Now it can. Now it must. This is the season where your peace needs to become more than a feeling. It needs to become a standard, a filter, a boundary, a form of obedience to what your inner life has already learned the hard way. Not every invitation deserves entry. Not every connection deserves explanation. Not every person who awakens emotion in you has earned access to your deeper world. That realization does not make you cold. It makes you clear, and clear people are much harder to bind, because once you know what it costs to stay tied to what drains you, you stop treating discernment like a luxury. You treat it like protection. You become slower to hand over your story, slower to ignore the body's warning, slower to explain away repeated disturbance, faster to notice when peace leaves the room, faster to honor what your inner life has been trying to say. That is growth with teeth in it, calm teeth. Quiet strength, the kind that no longer needs to announce itself. One day, you will look back on this betrayal and realize it did not only break your heart, it broke your addiction to confusion. It exposed where you were too willing to bleed for hope. It taught you that love cannot be proven by how much pain you can tolerate. It showed you that rescue does not always feel gentle when it first arrives. Sometimes it arrives as exposure, sometimes as collapse, sometimes as a door slamming shut where your own hand would have kept it cracked open for another year. And in time you will bless the clarity, not the betrayal itself. Never that. The clarity, the removal, the end of false access, the recovery of your own name, your own rhythm, your own stillness. So if this message is meeting you in the middle of that process, let this be the truth you carry forward. You did not lose everything. You lost what could no longer travel with you without costing you yourself. You are not rebuilding from nothing. You are rebuilding from truth, from discernment, from the pieces of you that survived even when your heart was entangled. From the part of you that knew, even in fragments, that peace was being violated. Honor that part now. Protect it. Listen faster next time, trust it deeper. And tonight or tomorrow morning or the next quiet moment you get, sit down and speak the separation aloud. Call your energy back. Release what is no longer yours to carry. Let the bond end in your body, not just in the story. Let the path clear all the way through, then walk it with calm authority. No chasing, no proving, no reopening what truth has already closed. Just peace with structure, just wisdom with breath in it. Just a life that no longer needs betrayal to teach it what peace is. If this spoke to your spirit, you can say that below. And pass this message to someone who needs the courage to stop grieving a rescue as if it were only a loss.